The silence came first. It rushed in like cold water, filling the space where a door had just slammed. Lila Hartwell stood on the cracked sidewalk, her brother Caleb beside her, and listened to that silence press against her ears. Behind them, the house they'd called home for 18 years stared back with blank windows. The yellow porch light, the one that used to mean safety, now felt like a searchlight exposing them to the November night. Her knuckles throbbed. A dull, stupid ache where she'd hit the doorframe instead of Warren's jaw. She'd wanted to hit him. God, she'd wanted to. But Caleb was watching, and Caleb needed her to be something other than rage. So she'd hit wood instead of flesh. And now her hand hurt, and they were homeless. "He didn't even watch us leave," Caleb said. His voice was flat, dead. He was 18 but looked younger in that moment, staring at the house, with the kind of hope that kills you slowly. The hope that maybe the door would open. Maybe Warren would feel something close to shame. The door didn't open. Lila looked at her brother. Really looked. He had 2 duffel bags at his feet, and that old backpack from sophomore year, the one with the broken zipper. Inside were yearbooks and dog-eared paperbacks, things he couldn't leave behind, because they held ghosts of their mother. Nora had been gone 6 years, but Caleb still carried her with him in ink and paper. Lila had 1 bag and a coat too thin for the weather. Everything she owned fit in 40 pounds of fabric and regret. "Come on," she said. The words came out harder than she meant, but soft wouldn't help them now. Soft wouldn't find them a place to sleep. She picked up her bag, felt the weight of it pull at her shoulder, started walking. Caleb followed. He always followed. They walked past houses with warm lights in the windows. Families inside doing what families do. Eating dinner, watching television, being safe. Each lit window felt like an accusation. Each manicured lawn a reminder of what they'd lost. The neighborhood they'd grown up in became foreign territory, with every step transforming from home to hostile ground in the span of 3 blocks. Warren's final words still echoed. He'd shouted them through the screen door, while his new wife, Crystal, watched from the kitchen with her arms crossed. "You're 19 now, Lila. An adult. And adults who can't follow simple rules don't get to live under my roof." The rule she'd broken was simple enough. She'd told him what she thought of him. Told him what she thought of the way he'd erased their mother from the house photo by photo, memory by memory, until all that remained was his own reflection in the polished surfaces he made them clean every Saturday. Caleb, 1 year younger and guilty by association, got the same sentence. 30 minutes to pack, 18 years condensed into 3 bags and the clothes on their backs. The air smelled of cut grass and coming rain. November in Oregon meant cold that crept into your bones and stayed there. Lila's breath made clouds in the streetlight glow. Her feet hurt. She grabbed the wrong shoes in the panic of packing. Fashion boots with heels too high for walking distance. But she walked anyway because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. She couldn't break. Not with Caleb beside her. They ended up at the Greyhound station downtown. Not because they had somewhere to go, but because it was open all night and the fluorescent lights offered a harsh, buzzing kind of safety. The waiting area smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. Hard plastic chairs bolted to the floor. A television mounted in the corner playing late-night news to an audience of insomniacs and the displaced. Lila chose 2 chairs near the back away from the ticket counter. and the scrutiny of the woman working the graveyard shift. They sat, arranged their bags like a barricade around their feet. Caleb pulled out a crumpled bus schedule and pretended to read it. Lila watched the clock on the wall, its red digital numbers marking time in a way that felt both too fast and impossibly slow. 3:47 a.m. The numbers changed. 3:48 a.m. She pulled her coat tighter. The station was heated but not warm. Never warm. A man in a threadbare jacket slept across 3 chairs, his belongings in a shopping cart beside him. A young mother bounced a crying baby, her eyes red with exhaustion. A teenager with a skateboard and a black eye stared at nothing. This was their world now, the country of the discarded. Lila closed her eyes, let herself remember for just a moment. Her mother's laugh, the way Nora used to sing while cooking off-key but joyful, the way she'd braid Lila's hair before school, her fingers gentle and sure, the way she'd gotten sick slowly at first, then all at once, the way cancer had stolen her voice before it stole her breath. 6 years. Lila had been 13 when her mother died, Caleb 12, and Warren, who'd promised to take care of them, had shown them the door the moment it was legally convenient. "What do we do?" Caleb asked. His voice cracked on the last word, and Lila opened her eyes to find him looking at her with an expression she'd seen too many times before. The one that said she was the captain now. The one that said he was drowning and she was the only thing keeping him afloat. "We sleep," she lied, "and we figure it out in the morning." But she didn't sleep. She sat in that plastic chair and watched the night crawl toward dawn, and she tried to imagine a future that made sense. She came up empty. Morning arrived cold and gray, the sky the color of old concrete. They left the bus station when commuters started arriving, when their presence began to draw attention. Lila's back ached from the chair. Her neck had a crick that made turning her head painful. Caleb looked worse, his eyes sunken, his skin pale. They found a coffee shop and spent $6 they couldn't afford on 2 small coffees and a shared muffin. Sat by the window and made the food last as long as possible. When the barista started giving them pointed looks, they left. The county social services office opened at 8. They were there at 7:45, waiting on the steps with a dozen other people whose lives had gone sideways. When the doors finally unlocked, they filed in like refugees seeking asylum. The office smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Beige walls, fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, a waiting area with chairs that matched the ones at the bus station. Posters on the walls about job training and food assistance, their colors too bright, their promises too vague. They took a number, sat, waited. 2 hours passed. The number on the wall changed with agonizing slowness. Lila watched people come and go, each one carrying their own weight of trouble. A woman with 3 children, an old man with a cane, a couple arguing in whispers about rent and bills and where it all went wrong. Finally, a man with tired eyes and a kind face called her name. Lila Hartwell, she stood. Caleb stood with her. The man led them through a maze of cubicles to a small office cluttered with towers of manila folders that threatened to collapse at any moment. His nameplate read, Patterson D., caseworker. He gestured to 2 chairs crammed in front of a desk that had seen better decades. "Lila and Caleb," he said. settling into his own chair with a sigh. He looked at his computer screen, squinted, typed something. "I've read your file. I'm sorry for what you're going through." It sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse. Pity was a language Lila didn't know how to speak. "Are there any resources?" she asked, cutting through the sympathy. "Emergency housing, anything?" Mr. Patterson's expression shifted, settling into practice fatigue. For 18 and 19-year-olds, it's complicated. You've aged out of most youth services. I can give you a list of shelters, but they're full most nights. I can sign you up for job placement programs, food assistance." He trailed off. They all knew those were threads, not a safety net. He kept typing, his fingers moving slowly across the keyboard. Squinted at the screen. His eyebrows drew together. "Wait a second," he murmured. Clicked a few more times. "This is odd." Lila leaned forward. Caleb's hand found hers, squeezed. "Your mother's file is cross-linked with your maternal grandmother's, Ilara Hartwell. Did you know her well?" Lila shook her head. "She died when I was 5. We barely remember her. Mom didn't talk about her much. Just that she lived up north somewhere on the coast." "Well," Mr. Patterson said, leaning back in his chair. It squeaked in protest. "It seems your grandmother was a very thorough woman. There's a provision in her will, a very specific one, attached to a small property she owned. It was to be held in trust until her oldest grandchild turned 19 or until both of you were legally declared without guardianship." He looked up from the screen, met Lila's eyes. "As of last night, you are." The words hung in the air between them. Lila felt her heartbeat in her throat. "What kind of property?" she asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Mr. Patterson peered at the screen again. "It's a commercial lot with a small structure in a town called Crescent Bay. It's listed here as the Anchor Point Bait and Tackle." A bait shop. The absurdity of it hit Lila like a slap. They'd been kicked out of their home and inherited a bait shop. The universe had a sick sense of humor. "There are complications." Mr. Patterson continued, his tone cautious now. "There's a significant amount of back taxes owed on the property. $7,200. The county has placed a lien on it. If it's not paid, it'll be seized and sold at auction in about 6 months. Of course, there was always a catch. But," he said, holding up a finger, "the will is very clear about the transfer of ownership. It's outside the regular probate process. A direct inheritance. To claim it, you have to appear in person at the Crescent Bay Municipal Office, prove your identity, and pay a transfer fee." He paused, almost smiled. $5. $5 for a piece of a world they didn't know. A gift from a ghost they couldn't remember. It was insane. It was hopeless. It was the only thing they had. Lila looked at Caleb. His eyes were wide, uncertain. She saw the question there before he asked it. "How far is Crescent Bay?" The bus ride felt like a journey to the edge of the world. 2 days on a Greyhound that smelled of diesel and recycled air, watching America scroll past greasy windows. They left Portland behind traded urban sprawl for rural highway. Endless fields of grass giving way to rolling hills, then dense forests of pine and fir that stretched to the horizon. They survived on gas station coffee and convenience store sandwiches that tasted of cardboard and regret. slept in awkward positions that left their necks aching, lulled by the constant drone of the engine and the hiss of air brakes. Lila kept their money in an envelope tucked inside her jacket. $141. She counted it 3 times a day like a prayer, like it might multiply if she just believed hard enough. They barely spoke. There was nothing to say that the rumble of tires on asphalt wasn't already saying for them. They were in motion, propelled forward into an unknown future, leaving a past that was already turning to smoke in the rearview mirror. Lila spent most of the time with her forehead against the cool window, watching the landscape change. She tried to picture her mother in this part of Oregon, tried to imagine the grandmother she'd barely known. What kind of person leaves their grandchildren a bait shop, not money, not a savings bond, a place that sells worms and hooks? It felt like a riddle she was too tired to solve. Her guilt was a constant companion, a cold weight in her stomach that shifted, but never left. If she just kept her mouth shut, if she just swallowed her anger for a few more months, maybe a year, Caleb would still have a roof over his head. They wouldn't be on this bus to nowhere burning through their last dollars on a gamble that would probably end in disappointment. Caleb, on the other hand, seemed almost peaceful. He'd pulled into himself, retreating to that quiet place he went when the world was too much. He read one of his dog-eared paperbacks, some fantasy novel about dragons and destiny, escaped into a story with clear heroes and villains where good won because it had to. Lila envied him that. They arrived in Crescent Bay on a Tuesday afternoon. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a small depot that looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since the 70s. The doors opened and the air that rushed in was different. Heavy, saturated with salt and the sharp organic smell of low tide. This wasn't the fresh, breezy scent of a tourist beach. This was the raw, working smell of a place that made its living from the sea. Fish and diesel fuel and the particular funk of nets left too long in the sun. Lila grabbed her bag and stepped down onto pavement cracked by decades of rain and salt spray. Caleb followed, blinking in the gray afternoon light. The sky was a uniform pearl color, low clouds merging with fog that blurred the edges of everything. The town huddled around a small harbor filled with working boats. Trawlers and crabbers, their hulls stained and scarred, their nets piled on docks like sleeping sea creatures. The buildings along the main street were weathered and practical, their paint scoured away by years of coastal wind. No tourist traps, no souvenir shops, just a diner, a hardware store, a small grocery, and a bar with a neon fish flickering in the window. The people they passed on the street had that same weathered look. They moved with deliberate purpose, their faces etched with lines earned from hard work and squinting at ocean glare. A few glanced at Lila and Caleb, at their city clothes and out-of-place luggage, with frank curiosity before looking away. They were strangers here, aliens in a land with its own language and customs. The municipal office was a small brick building next to the fire station. Inside, a woman with a mountain of white hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose looked up from her desk. She studied them over the rims like they were a puzzle she couldn't be bothered to solve. "Help you." Her voice was gravel and cigarettes. "We're here to claim a property," Lila said, keeping her voice steady. The anchor point bait and tackle. The woman's eyebrows shot up. "The old Hartwell place, Lord, haven't heard that name in years. Thought the sea claimed that wreck a long time ago." She shuffled some papers with movements that suggested she had all the time in the world, and no intention of hurrying for anyone. You got identification. They showed her their driver's licenses. She held them close to her face, comparing the photos to their tired, travel-worn faces. Grunted, apparently satisfied. It says here the transfer fee is $5, and you're responsible for all outstanding liens and taxes. You understand that? We do, Lila said. She pulled out 5 worn dollar bills and placed them on the counter. The woman stamped a form with a loud, satisfying thud, reached into a drawer, and produced a single, heavily rusted iron key attached to a faded plastic tag. The tag was so grimy you could barely make out the word anchor etched into its surface. She slid it across the counter. It's at the end of the public pier, she said. Something that might have been pity flickered in her eyes. Can't miss it. It's the one that's falling down. They found it easily enough. The pier stretched out into the harbor, its wooden planks gray and worn smooth by decades of salt and foot traffic. At the far end, clinging to the edge like something that refused to die, stood what remained of the anchor point bait and tackle. Calling it a building was generous. The structure sagged at angles that defied physics. The roof bowed in the middle like an old horse's back, its shingles missing in patches that showed rotting plywood underneath. The windows were boarded up with mismatched pieces of plywood, some newer than others, evidence of half-hearted maintenance over the years. The paint, once a cheerful sea blue, had peeled away to reveal gray splintered wood underneath. A sign hung above the door, carved wood, featuring a dog holding a fishing pole. The paint had faded so much the dog looked more like a ghost than an animal. Below it, in letters barely legible, the anchor point, established 1962. It was a monument to neglect, a testament to time and weather, and the relentless assault of salt air. It was theirs. Jesus, Caleb breathed. Lila said nothing. She walked up the rickety steps, testing each one before putting her full weight on it. The wood groaned but held. Caleb followed his footsteps, careful and uncertain. The key felt heavy in Lila's hand. Real. This was real. All of it. The bus ride, the strange inheritance, this rotting structure at the end of a pier in a town they'd never heard of. Real. The lock was a solid mass of rust. It took both of them, grunting and sweating despite the November cold, to force the key into the slot. For a moment, Lila was sure it would snap. But then, with a final desperate shove, it turned. A loud, grinding crack echoed across the water like a bone breaking. The door swung inward on a single protesting hinge opening into darkness. The smell hit them first. A thick, cloying wave of decay that rolled out to meet them. Mildew and damp earth and stagnant water. The smell of time itself rotting in the dark. Lila stood on the threshold, one hand on the doorframe, the other still holding the key. This was it. The moment of no return. Stepping inside meant accepting this inheritance of ruin. It meant committing to whatever came next. Behind them, the harbor lapped against the pilings. A gull cried overhead. The fog pressed in, turning the world soft and indistinct. Well, Caleb said, his voice tight. Home, sweet home. Lila took a breath. The foul air caught in her throat. She stepped into the gloom. The only light came from the open door behind them, a weak rectangle of gray that did little to pierce the darkness. It illuminated a blizzard of dust motes, a swirling galaxy stirred by their movement. Her foot landed on something that crunched. She looked down to see a carpet of dead leaves and desiccated insects, years of decay compressed into mulch. The floorboards were bare wood, warped and stained with water damage. As her eyes adjusted, shapes emerged from shadow. A long wooden counter ran along one wall, its surface coated in a sticky layer of grime so thick it looked like black ice. Behind it, shelves lined the wall, still stocked with the ghosts of commerce. Jars with contents long since turned to black sludge. Faded cardboard displays for fishing lures, their plastic bubbles yellowed and cracked. A calendar from 1998. Its picture of a leaping marlin forever frozen in better times. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like grotesque chandeliers, thick and heavy with dust. In one corner, a puddle of dark water reflected the gray light from the door. Evidence of a leak that had probably been dripping for decades. The air was so still and thick you could taste it. Every sound magnified. The drip of water, the creak of floorboards under their feet, the frantic beat of Lila's heart. Caleb found a light switch and flicked it. Nothing happened. The power had been cut long ago. Of course, he muttered, wiping his dusty hand on his jeans. Lila walked the perimeter of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She ran her hand along the counter, felt decades of grime under her fingers. Tried to imagine this place alive, full of customers buying bait and tackle. Full of purpose. She couldn't. Behind the counter, they found a door leading to a small back room, darker and damper than the main space. More shelves, mostly empty. A small rusted desk with a single drawer hanging open. In the corner, a stack of yellowed newspapers, their headlines announcing events that were now ancient history. A steep, narrow staircase led up. Lila climbed it cautiously, the steps groaning under her weight. Caleb followed close behind. The stairs opened into a tiny apartment. 2 rooms. A living area with a kitchenette so small you could touch both walls while standing in the middle. A bedroom barely big enough for a twin bed. A mattress lay on the floor, stained and moldy, its stuffing exposed through tears in the fabric. A single window looked out over the harbor, its glass so grimy it turned the world outside into an impressionist painting. This was where someone had lived. Maybe their grandmother. The thought sent a chill down Lila's spine. The intimacy of it, this abandoned life, was suffocating. "This is a teardown," Caleb said. His voice carried an edge of panic. "The whole place. The foundation's probably shot. The roof's gone. It's worthless." "It's not worthless," Lila heard herself say. "It's ours." He turned to her, his face smudged with dirt. His expression somewhere between frustration and desperation. "Ours, look at it. It's a wreck. A money pit. We don't have any money." He was right. Rationally, completely right. But something in Lila's chest had shifted when she'd stepped inside. Some recognition she couldn't name. This place felt familiar in a way that didn't make sense. The smell, the quality of light, the sound of water against pilings. It whispered to something deep in her bones. "Let's at least look around," she said, "before we decide anything." She went back downstairs to the storeroom, drawn by an instinct she didn't understand. Ran her hand along the dusty walls, the grimy shelves. Her gaze fell to the floor. In the far corner, half hidden by the pile of old newspapers, one of the floorboards looked different. shorter than the others, the gap around it slightly wider. Her heart started beating faster. She knelt, brushed away debris. There was a small notch cut into the edge of the board. She hooked her fingers into it and pulled. The board resisted, then came up with a low groan of old nails releasing from old wood. There, nestled in the dark, cool earth below, was a small metal box. It was an old cash box, the kind with a simple lock on the front. Black paint flaking off to reveal rust underneath. Nothing special, nothing magical. But Lila's hands trembled as she lifted it out. "Caleb," she called. Her voice cracked. "You need to see this." He came clattering down the stairs, saw the box in her hands. His eyes went wide. "What is that?" "I found it under the floor." They carried it into the main room, into the single patch of daylight, and set it on the grimy counter. It was locked. No key in sight. They searched the immediate area, hoping against hope, but found nothing. The frustration was physical, a burning in Lila's chest. They were so close to something. So close. "The desk," Caleb said suddenly. He ran back to the storeroom. She heard him rummaging, the screech of the drawer being pulled all the way out. A moment later, he returned holding a small rusted screwdriver. Not a key, but it might work. He wedged the tip into the seam next to the lock. Pushed. The metal groaned. He leaned into it, his knuckles white, his face set in determination. Lila held her breath. With a sharp, ugly pop, the lock gave way. The lid sprang open an inch. They looked at each other. This was it. The secret at the heart of the ruin. Lila lifted the lid. No money. No gold coins or jewelry or stacks of cash. Just paper. A thick bundle of envelopes tied together with a piece of faded blue ribbon. The paper yellowed with age, the handwriting on the top envelope a delicate, spidery script. On top of the bundle sat a single ornate brass key. Heavy and old-fashioned, the kind you'd see in a period drama. "Letters," Caleb said, his voice flat with disappointment. "It's just old letters." But Lila knew somehow that it wasn't just anything. She carefully lifted the bundle out of the box. The envelopes were addressed in that same elegant hand, "My dearest Nora." Their mother's name. They were from Elara, their grandmother, to their mother. Lila's throat tightened. They sat down on the filthy floor, the gray light from the doorway falling across their laps. The ribbon was so brittle it almost disintegrated in Lila's hands as she untied it. The letters were arranged chronologically, earliest on the bottom. But it was the letter on top that mattered. The one dated just days before Elara's death in 1998. The handwriting here was shakier, the elegant loops replaced by urgent, spiky script. Lila picked it up and began to read aloud, her voice wavering in the dusty silence. "My dearest Nora," it began. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened and I am gone. And if you are reading this here in this place, it means you found your way home." Lila's voice caught. She cleared her throat and continued. "I am so sorry, my love. I am sorry for every year I missed, for every birthday card never sent, for every phone call I never made. I need you to know that it was never because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you too much to let him find you. Him." The word hung in the air. "Your father." The letter continued, and Lila felt Caleb stiffen beside her. was not the man you remember. The charm he showed the world was a mask for a darkness I couldn't see until it was too late. He was a creature of control of anger. After you were born, it grew worse. He cut me off from my family, from my friends. He controlled every penny. He told me that if I ever tried to leave, he would make sure I never saw you again. And I believed him. He had connections, Nora. Dangerous ones. Men who operated in the shadows. It wasn't an idle threat. Lila had to stop. Take a breath. The story they'd been told was that their grandmother had run off, abandoned her family for a new life. Their grandfather, Jonathan, who died before Lila was born, was spoken of as a charming if troubled man who'd been heartbroken by his wife's betrayal. It was all a lie. She kept reading. This place, this little shop was my secret. It was the one thing I managed to buy with a small inheritance from my aunt that Jonathan didn't know about. I bought it under my maiden name. It was my escape plan for us. I spent years fixing it up in secret, making it a safe harbor, a place where he could never touch us. I was just waiting for the right moment. But the moment never came. The cancer came first. The brass key slipped from Lila's fingers and clattered onto the floorboards. Inside this box with these letters is a key. It is for a safe deposit box at the Crescent Bay Bank. I saved every dollar I could over the years, Nora. Every bit of grocery money I could skim, every secret sale of the little things I made and sold at the market. It's not a fortune, but I hope it's enough. Enough for a start. Enough to be safe. Lila's vision blurred. She blinked hard and continued. This shop is more than just a building. It's a promise I made to you. A promise I couldn't keep in life. So I am leaving it for you in death. Don't let his shadow touch your life or the lives of your children. Be free. Make this place a home. Be safe. Her voice broke on the last words. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Your mother, Elara. The letter ended there. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Lila had ever felt. It was a silence filled with ghosts. The ghost of a grandmother she'd never known. A woman of quiet courage and desperate strength. The ghost of their mother as a little girl, waiting for a rescue that never came. And the ghost of truth itself, a living thing that had just rewritten their entire history. The dust motes danced in the light, each one a tiny, forgotten moment. Lila looked at Caleb. His face was a mask, but a single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. He wasn't the quiet follower anymore. He was just a boy who'd lost his mother all over again. All this time, he whispered, his voice rough. We thought she left us. The lie they'd grown up with. That their grandmother was selfish. That she'd abandoned her family for her own desires. Their mother had rarely spoken of Elara. And when she did, it was with a sadness so deep Lila had thought it was the pain of abandonment. Now she understood. It was the pain of separation. Of being kept apart by forces too terrible to fight. Their grandfather, Jonathan, the man they'd seen in faded photographs, wasn't the tragic figure they'd imagined. He was a monster. And Warren, with his rules and his control and his final act of casting them out, was just a pale imitation. a lesser echo of the same dark story. Lila felt rage surge through her, pure and hot enough to make her dizzy. Rage for her mother, for the life of fear she must have lived. Rage for Alara, who died alone with her desperate plan unfulfilled. Rage for herself and Caleb, for the lies that had been the foundation of their childhood. But beneath the rage was something else, something harder and clearer. Purpose. She stood up, the letter still in her hand, looked around at the decaying room, at the cobwebs and the grime and the evidence of decades of neglect. This was Alara's battlefield, her last stand. The place she'd built with nothing but scraps and secrets, a fortress meant to protect her daughter. And now it was theirs. "We can't sell it," Lila said. The words came out quiet but certain. Caleb looked up at her. "What? This place? We can't sell it. It was supposed to be Mom's home. Our home. Grandma Alara left it for us. She wanted it to be a safe harbor." "Lila," Caleb's voice cracked. "Mom's gone. Grandma's gone. All we have is a pile of rotting wood and sad stories. I don't want to live in a sad story." "Then we changed the ending," she said. She felt it solidifying in her chest, this decision, this commitment. "We make it what Alara wanted it to be, a home, a safe place." "With what?" "We have $136. This place needs thousands, tens of thousands. We have a key to a safe deposit box." She picked up the brass key from the floor, held it up to the gray light. It was heavy in her palm, real and solid and full of possibility. "Tomorrow we go to the bank," she said. "We see what Grandma left us, and then we decide." But even as she said it, Lila knew she'd already decided. This wasn't about money or logic or what made practical sense. This was about breaking a cycle. Their family history was one of running. Alara trying to run from Jonathan, their mother running from her past, Lila and Caleb forced to run from Warren. This was their chance to stop running, to stand their ground, to build instead of flee. She looked at her brother, at the doubt and fear in his eyes, and she understood. He was scared. So was she. But fear was just another thing they'd learned to live with. "Trust me," she said. "One more day. Let's see what's in that vault. Then, if you want to walk away, we walk away together." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Just once. They spent that night in the apartment above the shop. They had nowhere else to go, and no money for a motel. Lila used some of their precious cash to buy cleaning supplies from the hardware store before it closed. Bleach and garbage bags and a broom. Spent 2 hours scrubbing the apartment floor until it was merely dirty instead of biohazardous. They dragged the ruined mattress down the stairs and left it on the pier. Laid out their coats as makeshift bedding. Shared the last of their convenience store sandwiches. Caleb read by the light of his phone until the battery died. Lila sat by the window and watched the lights of fishing boats move across the dark water. Somewhere out there in the fog, this town was living its life, going home to warm houses, eating dinner with families, being safe in ways Lila had forgotten existed. But for the first time since Warren had slammed that door, she didn't feel the crushing weight of hopelessness. She felt something else, something small and fragile but real. She felt like she had a purpose. The brass key sat on the windowsill, catching the faint light from the harbor. Tomorrow they would open whatever door it unlocked. Tomorrow they would see if Alara's desperate gamble had been worth it. Tonight they had a roof over their heads, rotting and leaking but theirs. Lila lay down on her coat and closed her eyes, listened to the sound of water lapping against pilings, breathed the salt air that crept through the gaps in the window frame. In the darkness, she whispered words to ghosts. "We're here, Grandma. We found your safe harbor, and we're going to make you proud." Morning came gray and cold, the kind of coastal dawn that never quite commits to daylight. Lila woke to the sound of gulls and the creak of old wood settling. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the smell hit her. Mildew and salt and decay. She opened her eyes to water-stained ceiling boards and remembered everything. Caleb was already awake, sitting by the window with his arms wrapped around his knees. He'd always been an early riser when he was anxious. Used to creep into the kitchen before dawn when their mother was sick, making himself small and quiet, as if silence could somehow delay the inevitable. "You ready?" Lila asked. He turned to look at her. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and there was a crease on his cheek from sleeping on his coat. He looked younger than 18. Looked like the kid who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. "What if there's nothing in the box?" he said. "What if it's empty, or the money's gone, or the bank won't give it to us? Then we figure out plan B." "What's plan B?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." She said it with more confidence than she felt. But that was her job now. Be confident when Caleb couldn't be. Be the captain when the ship was sinking. They used the last of their bottled water to wash their faces and hands. Lila ran her fingers through her hair, trying to make herself presentable. They looked like what they were. Two kids who'd slept on the floor of a condemned building. Two kids with everything riding on a brass key and a dead woman's promise. The Crescent Bay Bank was an old building on Main Street, all granite and civic pride. The kind of structure built to last centuries to weather depressions and recessions and the slow erosion of small-town America. It opened at 9. They were there at 8:45, standing on the steps, with the brass key clutched in Lila's hand. When the doors finally unlocked, they stepped into a lobby that felt like stepping back in time. Marble floors, high ceilings with ornate molding, teller windows with actual brass bars. The air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. A man in a suit that had seen better years looked up from behind a massive wooden desk. His nameplate read Mr. Whitmore, manager. He studied them with the kind of expression that suggested he was already preparing to say no to whatever they were about to ask. "Help you." His voice matched his face, weary and suspicious. Lila approached the desk, kept her spine straight, and her voice level. "We need to access a safe deposit box. We have the key." She placed the brass key on the desk between them. Mr. Whitmore picked it up, turned it over in his fingers. His eyebrows rose slightly. "This is an old one, very old. Do you have identification and proof of ownership?" They showed him their driver's licenses, explained about the inheritance, about Alara Hartwell, about the provision in the will. His expression shifted as they talked, moving from suspicion to something closer to recognition. Hartwell, he murmured. I remember that name. Before my time as manager, but the box has been here since the 60s. He stood. Come with me. He led them through a heavy door and down a short hallway to the vault. It was exactly like something out of a movie. A massive circular door of polished steel, a combination lock that looked like it could withstand a nuclear blast. Mr. Whitmore worked the combination with practiced efficiency. The door swung open with a whisper of well-oiled hinges. Inside the vault was small and windowless, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed softly. Metal boxes lined the walls, each with a number. Mr. Whitmore checked the key against a ledger, then pulled out a long, thin metal box and carried it to a small private room. Take your time, he said, and closed the door softly behind him. The box sat on the table between them. Lila and Caleb stared at it. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. Lila inserted the brass key, turned it. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in the small room. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were neat stacks of cash. $100 bills, paper-banded and pristine despite their age. They looked unreal, like prop money from a film. Caleb made a sound. Half gasp, half sob. Lila's hands trembled as she started counting. Pulled out each stack, checked the bands. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The numbers climbed. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. When she finished, she had to count again to be sure. $85,000. Not a fortune that would let them disappear to some tropical island. Not retirement money or generational wealth, but more money than either of them had ever seen in their lives. More money than felt real, enough to pay the back taxes, enough to buy tools and materials, enough to live on for months while they figured things out. Underneath the cash was a thick envelope. Lila opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was the official deed to the Anchor Point property. The paper yellowed, but the ink still clear. Elara Hartwell, sole owner, purchased 1962. And tucked inside the deed was one more piece of paper. A note in that same shaky handwriting from the final letter. 7 words. Make it a home. Be safe. Love, Elara. That's when Caleb broke. He leaned his head against the cool metal of the box and cried. Not angry tears or frustrated tears, but deep, ragged sobbing that came from somewhere ancient and wounded. Grief and gratitude and relief all mixed together into something too big to contain. Lila put her arm around him and let him cry. Let herself feel the weight of what their grandmother had done. A woman they'd never known fighting a war in secret, saving every penny she could steal from a monster's control, building a lifeboat, $1 at a time. And now that lifeboat was theirs. They sat in that small room for a long time. 2 orphans in a bank vault holding onto a ghost's final gift. When they finally emerged, Mr. Whitmore had paperwork ready. Forms to update the box ownership. Documents to transfer the deed into Lila's name. He worked efficiently. His earlier suspicion replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, he said as he notarized the final form. I was just a teller when she first opened this box. 1962. I remember because it was unusual. A woman opening an account under her maiden name, paying cash for everything. My manager at the time thought it was suspicious, but She had every right. He looked up at Lila and his eyes were kind. She came in twice a month for years, always small deposits, $20 here, $30 there. Never missed a payment on the box rental. And then one day in 1997, she stopped coming. I always wondered what happened to her. She got sick, Lila said quietly. Cancer. Mr. Whitmore nodded slowly. I'm sorry, but I'm glad her plan worked. Glad you found your way here. They walked out of the bank with $85,000 transferred to a new account. In Lila's name, the deed in her backpack, and a future that suddenly felt possible instead of impossible. The first stop was the municipal office. The same woman with white hair looked up as they entered, recognition flickering across her face. Back already? That was quick. We're here to pay the back taxes, Lila said. The woman's eyebrows rose. She pulled out a form, checked her records. That'll be $7,200. Cash or check? Check. Lila pulled out the temporary checkbook Mr. Whitmore had given her, wrote out the amount in her careful handwriting, signed her name at the bottom. The woman processed the payment with the same deliberate slowness as before. But when she handed Lila the receipt, her expression had shifted. Less pity, more respect. You're official property owners now, she said. Welcome to Crescent Bay. It was the first time anyone had welcomed them to anything. The work began that afternoon. Lila and Caleb returned to the anchor point with garbage bags and cleaning supplies determined to make a dent in the decades of decay. They started with the main room filling bag after bag with trash. Soggy newspapers and rotted merchandise and things too far gone to identify. The physical labor was brutal. Lila's muscles screamed with every bag she hauled to the dumpster behind the hardware store. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. But there was something cleansing about it. Every bag of trash removed felt like a small victory, like they were letting light back into a place that had been dark for too long. They scrubbed the counter with steel wool until their arms burned, and the original wood began to show through the grime. Swept the floors, pulled down the cobwebs, tore out rotten sections of drywall. By the time the sun started setting, they'd made visible progress. The room still looked terrible, but it looked like a terrible room in a building instead of a terrible room in a tomb. Lila stood in the doorway as dusk fell, looking at what they'd accomplished. Her clothes were filthy. She smelled like bleach and sweat and old wood. She'd never been more exhausted in her life, and she'd never felt more certain that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. You planning to rebuild this wreck or just make it pretty before it falls into the sea? The voice came from behind her, deep and rough like gravel rolled in honey. Lila turned to find an old man standing on the pier, his hands in the pockets of a canvas jacket worn soft with age. He was tall and lean with white hair that stuck out from under a fishing cap. His face was weathered like driftwood mapped with lines that spoke of decades spent squinting at ocean glare. But his eyes were sharp and clear, blue like deep water. They studied her with frank interest. Rebuilding, Lila said. She didn't know why she felt the need to prove herself to this stranger, but she did. We're rebuilding. The old man nodded slowly, walked closer. His gait was slightly uneven, favoring his left leg. Wendell Calloway, he said, extending a hand. Most folks call me Dell. I docked my boat 3 slips down. Been fishing these waters for 50-some years. Lila shook his hand. His palm was calloused like tree bark. Lila Hartwell. This is my brother Caleb. Caleb had appeared in the doorway, curious about the visitor. Hartwell, Dell said, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. Maybe sadness. You're Alara's grandkids. It wasn't a question. You knew her? Lila asked. Knew her girl. I was the one who helped her move that old ice machine up those stairs back in '63. He gestured toward the anchor point. Watched her build this place from nothing. Piece by piece, year by year. Toughest woman I ever met. He looked at the building, his expression complicated. Also watched it fall apart after she got sick. Tried to keep an eye on it, patch the worst of the leaks. But I'm old, and the sea don't wait for old men. He looked back at Lila. You really planning to bring it back? Yes. You know anything about construction, carpentry, electrical work? No. You got money? Some. Dell was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and it transformed his face. Well, you got something more important than knowledge or money. You got her eyes, Alara's eyes. That means you got her grit, too. He gestured toward the building. Mind if I take a look at what you're working with? They spent the next hour following Dell through the anchor point as he assessed the damage. He moved slowly but thoroughly, testing boards, checking joints, running his hands along walls like a doctor examining a patient. He pulled out a small flashlight and peered into dark corners, climbed the stairs to the apartment with care, and studied the ceiling. When he finally emerged back into the main room, his expression was grim. I'm not gonna lie to you. This place is in bad shape. Foundation's got some rot. Roof needs complete replacement. Electrical's non-existent. Plumbing's shot. You're looking at months of work and a good chunk of that money you said you have. Lila's heart sank. But, Dell continued, the bones are good. The main support beams are solid. The pier pilings were replaced in '89 after the big storm, so those are sound. And this building has survived 70 years of coastal weather. That counts for something. He looked at Lila. Really looked. Like he was measuring something he couldn't see. Your grandmother built this to last. She built it to be a safe harbor. You want to honor that I'll help you. Can't do the heavy work like I used to, but I can teach you. Show you how to do it right. Why? Lila asked. The question came out more suspicious than she intended. Why would you help us? Dell's expression softened. Because Alara was my friend. One of the few real friends I had. Because I watched her fight for this place. Fight for her daughter. Fight to build something good in a world that tried to break her. He paused. Because I stood by and let it rot after she died. And that's been eating at me for years. This is my chance to make it right. He extended his hand again. So what do you say? You want an old fisherman as your foreman? Lila looked at Caleb. He nodded. She shook Dell's hand. When do we start? Tomorrow. 6 a.m. Dress warm and be ready to work. I'll bring coffee and a proper tool belt. You're going to need both. True to his word, Dell appeared the next morning just as the sun was breaking over the eastern hills. He carried 2 thermos bottles and a canvas bag that clinked with tools. Lila and Caleb were already awake, having spent another uncomfortable night on the apartment floor. "First lesson," Dell said, handing Lila a thermos. "Good coffee makes everything more bearable. Second lesson, we start with the roof. Everything else is pointless if the rain keeps getting in." He taught them how to tear off old shingles without damaging the underlayment. Showed them how to spot rot in the plywood decking. Explained the geometry of roof pitch and water runoff in a way that made Lila wish she'd paid more attention in high school geometry. The work was hard. Harder than cleaning. Lila's hands blistered. Then the blisters popped. Then her hands calloused over. Her shoulders burned from reaching overhead. Her legs ached from climbing up and down the ladder. But Dell was patient. He never did the work for them, but he never let them struggle alone. He stood beside them, his weathered hands guiding theirs, his calm voice talking them through each step. "That's it. Nail goes here at an angle. You want to bite into the beam below. 3 nails per shingle. Not 2, not 4. 3. By the end of the first week, they'd stripped the entire roof down to bare decking, replaced the rotten sections, started laying new tar paper. Lila's body was a map of aches and pains, but her hands were learning the weight of a hammer, the resistance of a nail in good wood versus rotten wood, the satisfaction of a clean cut with a saw. Dell's friends started showing up. Old men, most of them with time on their hands and skills in their fingers. Tom, who'd been a carpenter before his back gave out, taught Caleb how to frame a wall square. Raymond, who'd wired half the houses in Crescent Bay in the 70s, walked Lila through basic electrical principles. They didn't ask for payment, didn't expect anything beyond coffee and the chance to be useful again. "We take care of our own here," Tom said one afternoon, wiping sawdust from his eyes. "Your grandmother was one of ours. That makes you one of ours, too." The woman from the diner appeared one evening carrying a pot of something that smelled like heaven. She was shorter than Lila, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and laugh lines around her eyes. "Maggie Fletcher," she said, setting the pot down on the cleanest section of counter. "I run the diner up the street. Figured you kids need proper food, not whatever garbage you've been eating." The pot contained clam chowder, thick and rich and still steaming. Maggie ladled out 3 bowls while Lila, Caleb, and Dell watched in hungry silence. "Go on," Maggie said. "Eat before it gets cold." The first spoonful was a revelation. Creamy and salty and full of tender clams and chunks of potato. Lila had never tasted anything so good. She ate until the bowl was empty, then looked up to find Maggie watching her with satisfaction. "You like it? It's incredible. Good. Because you're going to learn how to make it. This place used to serve the best chowder on the coast when your grandmother ran it. People came from 3 towns over. We're bringing that back." Over the next weeks, Maggie became a regular presence. She'd show up in the late afternoons with containers of food and stay to teach Lila the secrets of good chowder, the ratio of cream to stock, the importance of cooking the potatoes separately, the way you add the clams at the very end so they don't turn to rubber. "Cooking is like carpentry," Maggie said one evening watching Lila chop celery. "You need good ingredients, the right technique and patience. Rush any of it and the whole thing falls apart." Lila found herself looking forward to those lessons. There was something meditative about cooking, something nurturing. After days of tearing down and rebuilding, it felt good to create something people could consume and enjoy. "What are you planning to do with this place?" Maggie asked one evening. They were alone, Caleb and Dell having gone to pick up supplies. "Once it's fixed up, I mean." Lila had been thinking about that. Thinking about it late at night when she couldn't sleep about it, while she hammered nails and swept floors and learned the rhythm of rehabilitation. "Not just a bait shop," she said slowly. "The world doesn't need another bait shop. But people need places to feel safe, to warm up, to be together." She looked around the main room, trying to see past the current state of decay to what it could become. "I want to keep some of it as tackle and bait for the fishermen, but I also want a coffee bar. Good coffee, not gas station stuff. And your chowder. Maybe some sandwiches. Simple food made right. A place where people can come in from the cold, sit for a while, look at the water. Feel like they belong somewhere." Maggie smiled. "The safe harbor." "What?" "That's what you should call it. That's what your grandmother wanted it to be. A safe harbor. Not just a building, but a feeling." Lila tested the words in her mouth. The safe harbor. It felt right. It felt like promise and purpose wrapped together. "The safe harbor," she repeated. "Yeah, I like that." By the end of the second month, the anchor point was transforming. The new roof kept the rain out. The walls were patched and painted a fresh white. The floors were sanded and sealed. They'd wired basic electrical and run new plumbing to the small bathroom in the back. The main room was taking shape according to Lila's vision. Half would remain tackle and bait with new shelving and organized stock. The other half would be the cafe with a long counter Dell was building from reclaimed barnwood. They'd found an old espresso machine at an estate sale and spent 2 weeks getting it working again. Lila worked 14-hour days. Wake at dawn, work until dark. Fall into exhausted sleep on the apartment floor. Her hands were permanently stained with wood stain and paint. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on a frame turned lean and hard from manual labor. But she'd never felt stronger, never felt more capable. Every nail she drove, every board she cut, every pipe she fitted was proof that she could do this, that she could take something broken and make it whole. Dell became the father figure she'd never had. He showed up every morning without fail, even on days when his leg clearly pained him. Taught her not just carpentry and construction, but patience, perseverance, the value of doing something right, even when doing it fast would be easier. "My father was a carpenter," he told her one afternoon. They were working on the counter, fitting joints together with precision. "Taught me that how you build something says everything about who you are. You build sloppy, you are sloppy. You build with care, with attention, with respect for the materials and the craft. Then you're worth something." He looked at her work, at the joint she'd just cut. "You're worth something, Lila Hartwell. Don't let anyone tell you different." The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March, 3 months into the renovation. Lila found it taped to the front door when she arrived at 6 a.m., before Dell showed up. A cream-colored envelope, thick, expensive paper addressed simply to property owner, the anchor point. Something about it made her stomach clench. She peeled it off the door and opened it. Inside was a letter printed on heavy bond paper with an embossed letterhead. Cascadia Development Group. Lila read it standing there in the cold morning air, her breath making clouds. her hands starting to shake. The language was smooth, corporate, congratulating her on the ownership of the property, commending her renovation efforts, and then making an offer to purchase the property and the pier space it occupied. $350,000. The number made her dizzy. More than 4 times what Elara had left them. Enough to buy a house, a car, to go to college, to start a life free from financial worry. But the letter didn't end there. She turned to the second page and felt her heart drop. It was a legal notice from the county planning department. A violation notice. It listed in cold bureaucratic detail every way their property failed to meet current commercial zoning and safety codes. Faulty electrical wiring, inadequate plumbing, structural instability, failure to comply with ADA accessibility standards. The list went on and on, each violation a potential fine, each fine building toward property seizure. 90 days to bring the property up to full compliance. Failure to comply would result in escalating daily fines, eventual condemnation, and seizure of the property by the county. The letter from Cascadia Development ended with a smooth, friendly closing line. We understand that meeting these modern standards can be a significant financial burden. We are happy to provide a simple, profitable alternative. It was a trap. A perfectly legal, ruthlessly efficient trap. They'd waited until Lila had invested time and money and hope into the property, and now they were squeezing. Take the offer or lose everything to county seizure. Lila read the letter 3 times, hoping she'd misunderstood something. But the words didn't change. 90 days. Full commercial compliance. Costs that would dwarf the money they had left. Dell found her still standing there when he arrived 20 minutes later, the letter shaking in her hands. "What's wrong?" She handed him the letter without speaking, watched his expression harden as he read. When he finished, he looked up at the building, at the new roof and fresh paint, and his jaw clenched. "Cascadia," he said. The name came out like a curse. "Should have known they'd try this. You know them, know of them. They've been buying up waterfront property for the last 5 years. Luxury condos for rich people from Portland and Seattle who want a quaint coastal experience." The contempt in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "They forced old Tom Henderson out of his boat repair shop last year. Same tactic. Code violations, impossible compliance timelines, then a generous offer right when you're most desperate." He handed the letter back to her. His hand was steady, but his eyes were angry. "There's something else you should know. About why they want this property so badly." They went inside. Dell made coffee on the small camp stove they'd been using while the kitchen was still under construction. When they were both sitting at the counter with warm mugs, he began. "The man who runs Cascadia is named Thaddeus Branson. He's 54 now, but back in the 50s and 60s, he was Jonathan Hartwell's business partner. Lila's grandfather. The monster from Elara's letters. They ran what they called an import business," Dell continued. "But everyone knew it was more than that. Smuggling mostly. Cigarettes, alcohol, some say worse. They had connections to organized crime up in Portland. Not made men, nothing that official, but connected enough to be dangerous." He took a sip of coffee, his eyes distant with memory. Elara knew about it. She'd figured out what Jonathan was really doing. When she started planning her escape, when she bought this place under her maiden name and started moving money. Thaddeus found out. Saw it as a threat. If Elara left and talked, it could bring attention they didn't want. What happened? Jonathan died before she could leave. Heart attack in '68. Convenient timing, some said, though nothing was ever proven. Thaddeus went legitimate after that. Cleaned up his operation, moved into real estate development. Built himself into a respectable businessman. Dell looked at Lila, but he never forgot. Never forgot that Elara threatened to expose them. This shop, this property, it's personal for him. It's unfinished business. And now that Elara's gone, and you're here trying to rebuild what she started, he sees his chance to finally tear it down for good. The weight of it settled on Lila's shoulders. This wasn't just about property development. This was revenge. Delayed by decades, but no less vicious for the wait. Can we fight it? She asked. Is there any way to meet compliance? Dell was quiet for a long moment. Full commercial compliance would cost $50,000–$60,000 minimum, maybe more. Licensed electrician for the whole building. Commercial plumbing, structural reinforcement, ADA ramps and bathrooms. It's possible, but we don't have that kind of money. She'd spent $30,000 on materials and basic repairs. Had maybe $40,000 left. Not enough for full compliance. Not enough to fight a corporation with lawyers and connections and time on their side. The letter had been calculated perfectly. Hit them when they were invested, but not finished. When walking away would hurt, but staying would cost more than they had. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his face pale. He'd clearly heard enough. We should take the money, he said. His voice was small, defeated. 350,000 Lila. That's life-changing money. We can't win this. They have lawyers' connections. We're just kids trying to fix up a building. We should take the offer and get out while we still can. Lila looked at her brother, saw the fear in his eyes. The reasonable, logical fear of someone who'd learned too young that fighting back just meant getting hurt worse. She looked at Dell, who was watching her with his sharp blue eyes, not telling her what to do, just watching to see who she'd become. She looked around the room they'd spent 3 months rebuilding. At the counter, Dell had taught her to build. At the walls she'd painted. At the new roof keeping the rain out. At Elara's vision slowly coming back to life through their work and sweat and stubborn refusal to quit. 3 generations of Hartwell women running from the same darkness. Elara running from Jonathan. Their mother running from her father's shadow. Lila and Caleb running from Warren. The running never stopped. The fear never ended. Unless someone finally stood still and said no. We're not selling, Lila said. Her voice was quiet but steady as stone. This is exactly what Grandma Elara fought against. Men with power trying to take what isn't theirs. Trying to erase what a woman built with her own hands and her own strength. She looked at Caleb. She didn't run and neither will I. This is our line. This is where we stand. We can't win, Caleb said. There were tears in his eyes now. They'll take it anyway. The county will seize it, and we'll end up with nothing. Maybe, Lila said. But we won't have run. We won't have quit. And that matters. She looked at Dell. You said you'd help us. Does that offer still stand? Dell stood up. His movements were slow but deliberate. He extended his hand. Girl, I was hoping you'd say that. Let me make some calls. That afternoon, Dell brought a man to the anchor point. Porter Ashford was 65, retired with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been a JAG lawyer in the Navy before retiring to Crescent Bay to fish and read and pretend he wasn't bored out of his mind. He read through both letters with careful attention, made notes on a legal pad, asked questions about the property history, the inheritance, the money Elara had left. When he finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. "It's a squeeze play," he said. His voice was precise, educated. Textbook corporate bullying using county code enforcement as muscle. The violations are real, but the timeline is weaponized. 90 days isn't enough for full compliance, and they know it. "Can we fight it?" Lila asked. "We can file for extensions, challenge the assessment, apply for historical preservation status that might exempt you from some modern codes. The pier structure dates back to the 1890s, and this building has been here since '62. That's got historical value." He looked at her directly. "It will be a fight. A long, complicated, expensive fight. They have resources and connections. You have determination and a legitimate historical claim. It's not a sure thing either way. What are our chances?" Honest answer, 40-60 against. "But I've won longer odds before." Lila felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder, felt Dell's presence solid and supportive beside her. "What would it cost for you to represent us?" Porter smiled. "I'm retired and bored, and I hate bullies. Pro bono for now. If you win and the safe harbor becomes profitable, you can pay me a small percentage of the first year's net. If you lose, you owe me nothing but a good fishing story." He extended his hand. "What do you say, want an old Navy lawyer in your corner?" Lila shook his hand. His grip was firm and certain. "When do we start?" "Now." The next days were a blur of paperwork and research. Porter filed for a 90-day extension citing historical preservation considerations. Filed an appeal of the code violations arguing disproportionate enforcement. Started the process of getting the anchor point registered as a historical structure with the State Preservation Society. While he worked the legal angle, Dell worked his connections. He called in favors from every tradesman and contractor in a 30-mile radius. Got cost estimates for the required work. Found ways to do things cheaper without cutting corners. And he told Lila about a grant, a small state program for historical preservation of coastal structures. It was a long shot, he said. Competitive. But the anchor point had been continuously operating in the same family for over 60 years. That counted for something. The application was 20 pages long. Lila spent 3 nights filling it out by hand, documenting every detail of the building's history. Elara's story, the community's significance. Attached photos of the renovation in progress. Letters of support from Dell and Maggie and the other locals who'd become part of the project. She mailed it on a Friday and tried not to think about it. Tried to focus on the work still ahead. But some nights, lying on the apartment floor waiting for sleep, doubt would creep in. The voice that said they were fools for fighting. That said Caleb was right, and they should take the money and run. That said Lila was being stubborn and prideful, and it would cost them everything. Those nights she'd pull out Elara's final letter and read it by phone light. Make it a home. Be safe. Safe didn't mean running. It meant standing. It meant building something that couldn't be taken away by men who thought power meant ownership. On a Tuesday in mid-April, 6 weeks after the violation notice arrived, Dell found Lila on the pier at dawn. She'd been there for an hour watching the fishing boats head out, trying to quiet the anxiety that had been building for days. "Got news," he said. Something in his voice made her heart hammer. "The Historical Preservation Grant. They approved it." Lila stared at him. "What?" $16,000 for restoration and maintenance of a historically significant coastal structure. They said your application was one of the most compelling they'd received this year. 16,000. Combined with the 40 they had left, it was enough. Not comfortable, not excess, but enough to hire the licensed contractors to do the work the county required. Enough to meet compliance, enough to fight. Lila felt tears sting her eyes. She tried to stop them and couldn't. Dell pulled her into a hug. His old canvas jacket smelling of salt and fish and decades of hard work. "We can do this," he said. "We're going to do this." And for the first time since the violation notice arrived, Lila believed him. The grant money arrived in the account on a Thursday morning. $16,000, that felt like a miracle. Lila stood in the bank with the deposit receipt in her hand and felt the weight of possibility settle over her shoulders. They had $56,000 now. Enough to hire the licensed contractors. Enough to meet the county's demands. Enough to stand their ground. Porter filed an amended response to the violation notice outlining their plan for compliance and citing the Historical Preservation Grant as evidence of the property's cultural value. The county gave them a conditional approval, 60 days to complete the work. One final inspection at the end. Pass and they were clear. Fail and the property would be condemned. 60 days, 8 weeks. It felt impossibly short and terrifyingly final. Dell rallied his network. By the end of that week, they had commitments from a licensed electrician, a master plumber, and a structural engineer willing to work at cost because Dell vouched for them and because the story of what Lila was trying to do had spread through the small community like wildfire. The girl fighting the corporation, the granddaughter honoring her grandmother's dream. David versus Goliath played out in lumber and wire and determination. People wanted to be part of that story. The electrician arrived on a Monday. His name was Russell Chen, but everyone called him Russ. He was 45, compact and precise, with hands that moved with the confidence of 3 decades in the trade. He walked through the anchor point with a tablet, making notes, taking photos, sketching diagrams. When he finished, he sat down with Lila at the counter Dell had built. "Your wiring is a nightmare," he said bluntly. "Knob and tube from the 60s mostly deteriorated. Some amateur additions that are genuine fire hazards. We need to rewire the entire structure. New panel, new circuits, everything up to current code. How long? 3 weeks if I work alone. 1 week if I bring my crew. What's the cost difference?" Russ looked at her, really looked, saw the exhaustion and the determination in equal measure. "For you. Same cost either way. I'll bring the crew." The plumber came next. Margaret Stone, 60 years old, built like a linebacker with gray hair and a braid down her back. She'd been one of the first female master plumbers licensed in Oregon back in the 80s. And she didn't take grief from anyone. She spent 2 hours in the crawlspace under the building, examining pipes that hadn't been touched since they were installed. When she emerged, covered in cobwebs and rust, her expression was grim. Everything from the main connection forward needs replacement, she said. Galvanized steel pipe all corroded. You're one freeze away from a rupture that would flood this whole place. She pulled out a worn notebook and started sketching. I can run new PEX from the main, install a proper hot water system, bring the bathroom up to ADA spec. But it's going to be invasive. We'll need to open walls, access floors. It's going to get worse before it gets better. How much worse? Margaret smiled. It wasn't a comforting smile. You'll be living in a construction zone for a month. No running water most days, dust everywhere. But when we're done, you'll have plumbing that'll last 50 years. Let's do it. The work began in earnest. Russ and his crew arrived at dawn with spools of wire and boxes of fixtures. Margaret and her apprentice showed up an hour later with cutting torches and pipe threaders. The building filled with the sounds of saws and drills and the sharp smell of cut metal. Lila and Caleb became part of the crew. They pulled wire through walls under Russ's direction, held pipe steady while Margaret soldered joints, carried materials up and down the stairs until their legs burned. They worked 12-hour days, sometimes 14, fueled by Maggie's coffee and sandwiches and sheer stubborn will. Del was there every morning, his weathered face a constant in the chaos. He couldn't do the heavy lifting anymore, but he could supervise, could catch mistakes before they became problems, could keep everyone's spirits up when the work felt overwhelming. Remember, he'd say when frustration mounted, Ilara built this place one day at a time. You're doing the same. Just keep moving forward. Word continued to spread. The evening news out of Portland sent a reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes and a recording device who interviewed Lila while contractors worked around them. Why fight so hard for an old bait shop? The reporter asked. Lila looked around at the controlled chaos, at Russ running wire through the ceiling, at Margaret cutting pipe in the back room, at Caleb helping Del sort lumber outside. It's not about the building, she said. It's about what it represents. My grandmother spent her whole life planning an escape from an abusive man. This shop was supposed to be her safe harbor. She never got to use it, but she left it for us. Walking away now would mean all her sacrifice was for nothing. Would mean powerful men get to win just because they have more resources. She looked directly at the camera. That's not the world I want to live in. So I'm standing here and saying no. This far and no further. The segment aired 3 days later. Lila didn't see it too busy learning how to tape drywall seams from Tom. But Del saw it, and Maggie, and half of Crescent Bay. The next morning, there were 15 people waiting at the anchor point when Lila arrived at dawn. Men and women she'd never met. Some with tool belts, some with cleaning supplies, some with just their hands and a willingness to help. Saw the news, said a woman in coveralls. Figure you could use some extra hands. They worked all day, sanding drywall, painting walls, installing the new bathroom fixtures Margaret had specified. By sunset, they'd accomplished what would have taken Lila and Caleb a week. It kept happening. Every few days, new volunteers would show up, sometimes locals, sometimes people who'd driven from Portland or Eugene inspired by the story. They'd work for a day or a weekend refuse payment and leave with the satisfaction of having been part of something bigger than themselves. The community was building the safe harbor as much as Lila was. 6 weeks into the 60-day deadline, the structural engineer completed his assessment. The support beams needed sistering in 3 locations. 2 sections of floor joists needed replacement. The foundation required some minor reinforcement where rot had set in. Expensive work, skilled work, but nothing insurmountable. Dell called in one final favor. A contractor he'd served with in Korea, now 75, and mostly retired but still sharp as a blade. His name was Henry Walsh, and he'd been building houses since before Lila was born. Henry walked the building with the engineer's report in one hand and a level in the other. Checked every measurement twice. When he finished, he sat down with Lila and pulled out a calculator. "I can do the structural work in 2 weeks," he said. "Maybe less if my son helps. The cost for materials and labor comes to $8,000. Lila did the math in her head. They had $11,000 left in the account. 8 for structural work left $3,000 for contingencies. It would be tight. Impossibly tight. "Can you do it for 7? She asked. Henry looked at her. His eyes were the pale blue of someone who'd spent a lifetime squinting at the sun. He'd seen war and loss and hard times. He recognized the same in her. "I can do it for 7. But you're going to help. You and your brother. I'll teach you how to do it right. But you'll do the grunt work. Deal." Deal. They shook hands. His palm was calloused smooth as river stone. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Lila's life. She woke at 5 every morning, worked until midnight, slept 4 hours, and did it again. Her body was a constant ache. Muscles she didn't know she had screamed in protest. But she learned how to jack up a floor to relieve pressure, how to cut and fit a sister beam, how to sister joists and secure them with lag bolts, how to work with precision even when exhausted. Henry was a hard teacher, but a good one. He expected excellence and wouldn't accept less. But when she got it right, when she cut a beam to exact specification or set a bolt at the proper torque, he'd nod with approval that meant more than 1,000 empty compliments. "You've got the hands for this," he said one afternoon. They were taking a rare break, sitting on the pier with thermoses of coffee. "Your grandmother had the same gift. Some people fight materials, try to force them into shape. Good builders work with what they have. Respect the wood and the steel and the stone. You do that naturally." "How did you know my grandmother?" "I didn't really. Met her maybe twice. But Dell talked about her. A lot. Especially after she died. He blamed himself for not doing more to help her when she got sick. For not keeping this place from falling apart after she was gone." Henry looked at the building, at the fresh roof and painted walls. "This isn't just about you honoring Alara. It's about Dell finally forgiving himself. Keep that in mind when things get hard. You're not carrying this alone." With 10 days left on the deadline, the major work was complete. The electrical was done, every circuit tested and certified. The plumbing was functional. The new bathroom gleaming with white tile and chrome fixtures. The structural reinforcement was solid, the building more sound than it had been in decades. But they still needed to pass inspection. One county inspector with a clipboard and the power to condemn everything they'd built. Porter prepared them like a general preparing troops for battle. He made Lila memorize every code requirement, walked her through what the inspector would check and in what order, gave her copies of every permit, every certification, every piece of paper that proved they'd done the work right. The inspector's name is Catherine Reeves, Porter said. She's tough but fair. She won't pass you out of sympathy, but she won't fail you out of spite either. You've done the work. The building is sound. Trust that. Easy to say, harder to believe. The night before the inspection, Lila couldn't sleep. She walked through the safe harbor in the dark, running her hands along walls she'd helped build, checking circuits she'd helped wire, testing faucets she'd helped install. This place was part of her now. Her sweat was in the drywall compound. Her blood was in the floorboards from a dozen scraped knuckles. Her hope was in every nail driven true. If they failed tomorrow, if the inspector found one critical violation, one deal-breaking flaw, it would all be over. The county would condemn the property. Cascadia would swoop in and buy it at auction. Thaddeus Branson would tear it down and build condos where Alara's dream had stood. 3 generations of Hartwell women would have lost to the same darkness. Lila found herself at the counter the one Dell had taught her to build. She pulled out her phone and opened the photo she'd saved. The final letter from Alara. Read it again by the light of her screen. Make it a home. Be safe. I'm trying, Grandma, she whispered to the empty room. I'm trying so hard. The inspection was scheduled for 9 a.m. By 8, the safe harbor was ready. Every surface cleaned, every fixture polished, every certificate laid out in order. Russ was there to answer electrical questions, Margaret for plumbing, Henry for structural, Porter with his legal documents, Dell and Maggie and a dozen others who'd become part of the story waiting outside to see how it would end. Lila stood by the front door, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Caleb beside her, his hand finding hers and squeezing tight. At 9 exactly, a county truck pulled up to the pier. A woman in a hard hat and safety vest climbed out carrying a clipboard and a tablet. She was maybe 50 with gray streaking her dark hair and the no-nonsense expression of someone who'd seen every shortcut and code violation imaginable. Catherine Reeves walked up the pier with measured steps, stopped at the base of the stairs, and looked up at the safe harbor. Her expression gave nothing away. Lila Hartwell, she asked. That's me. Let's see what you've got. The inspection took 3 hours. Catherine worked with methodical precision, checking every outlet, every pipe joint, every structural connection. She tested GFCI circuits, ran water through every fixture, examined the foundation reinforcement with a flashlight and a measuring tape. She found minor issues, an electrical box that needed better securing, a pipe hanger that was slightly out of spec, a section of drywall tape that wasn't quite smooth. She noted each one on her tablet without comment. Lila's stomach churned with every notation. Every mark on that tablet could be the thing that failed them. When Catherine finally finished, she stood in the center of the main room and reviewed her notes. The silence stretched. Lila thought she might be sick. Catherine looked up. Her expression was still neutral professional. You had 37 code violations on the original notice, she said. I'm seeing full compliance on 35 of them. The 2 remaining are minor and can be corrected within 30 days without penalty. She pulled a form from her clipboard, signed it with quick, efficient movements. Conditional approval granted. Correct the 2 remaining items within 30 days, and you'll receive full clearance. She handed the form to Lila. "Congratulations, you passed." The words didn't register at first. Lila stared at the signed form at Catherine's signature in blue ink, making it official. They'd passed. They'd won. Behind her, someone started clapping. Then another person. Then everyone. Dell and Maggie and Russ and Margaret and Henry and Porter, and all the volunteers who'd given their time and skill and belief to this impossible project. Catherine packed up her equipment and headed for the door. But she paused on the threshold, looked back at Lila. "I've been doing inspections for 20 years," she said. "This is the first time I've seen a property go from condemned to compliant in 60 days. Whatever you're building here, it matters. Don't let anyone tell you different." Then she was gone, and Lila was surrounded by people hugging her, and Caleb congratulating them, celebrating a victory that had felt impossible 8 weeks ago. But in the midst of the celebration, Lila saw a man standing at the end of the pier, watching. He wore an expensive suit that looked out of place among the work clothes and coveralls. His hair was silver, his face tanned and handsome in the way of men who spent money to look younger than their years. Even from a distance, Lila knew who he was. Thaddeus Branson. The celebration quieted as people noticed him. The crowd parted slightly, creating a path between Lila and the man who'd tried to take everything from them. He walked forward with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. Stopped 10 feet from the door. Close enough to talk. Far enough to maintain distance. "Miss Hartwell," he said. His voice was smooth, cultured. The voice of boardrooms and country clubs. "Congratulations on passing inspection. That's quite an accomplishment." Lila said nothing, just stood her ground and waited. "I'm Thaddeus Branson. I believe you received my offer." "I received your threat," Lila said. Her voice was steady. Caleb moved to stand beside her, Dell on the other side. A wall of support. Branson's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I prefer to think of it as an opportunity. $350,000 is generous for a property in this condition. Even with your renovations, the commercial real estate value doesn't justify that price. Then why offer it? Because I'm a businessman who sees potential. This location could be valuable in the right hands. The right hands being yours." Naturally, Lila took a step forward. The crowd behind her shifted, closing ranks. She felt their presence like a physical force. The community that had rallied to help her. The people who'd invested in this dream because it was worth investing in. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "I know you were my grandfather's partner. I know what kind of business you ran. I know you tried to stop my grandmother from escaping." Branson's expression hardened. The friendly businessman mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. "Your grandmother was a thief," he said, his voice losing its smooth veneer. "She took money that belonged to the business, money that was rightfully ours. She took money to survive, to escape an abusive man who would have killed her if she'd stayed." That's a generous interpretation of events. That's the truth. And this shop, this property, it was her escape plan, her safe harbor. You tried to take it from her then. You're trying to take it from me now. But you're going to fail. Branson looked past her at the building, at the fresh paint and new roof. at the sign being installed above the door that read, "The Safe Harbor, established 1962. "You think you've won," he said. His voice was soft now, dangerous. "You think passing one inspection means this is over. But I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, connections. I can make doing business in this town impossible for you. I can file complaint after complaint until you're drowning in legal fees. I can wait you out." "Then wait," Lila said. "Because I'm not selling. Not today. Not ever. This property stays in the Hartwell family. It stays a safe harbor for people who need one. And there's nothing you can do about it." The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Branson stared at her, really stared. And Lila stared back, refusing to flinch, refusing to look away. She saw him see her. See the exhaustion and the determination, and the absolute unwillingness to bend. She saw the moment he understood he'd lost. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. But his voice had lost its edge. He was going through motions now, playing a hand he knew was beaten. "Maybe," Lila said, "but it's my mistake to make. This is my property, my inheritance, my choice, and I choose to keep it." Dell stepped forward then, stood beside Lila, his weathered face set in hard lines. "You need to leave Thaddeus," he said. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades. "You lost this fight 60 years ago when Ilara built this place. You lost it again today. Time to accept that and move on." Branson looked at Dell, at the crowd of people behind them, at Porter with his lawyer's eyes taking in every word, at the building that had survived his best efforts to destroy it. He straightened his suit jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, reaching for dignity in defeat. "This isn't over," he said. But it was a hollow threat. They all knew it. He turned and walked back down the pier to a black Mercedes waiting on the street. Got in without looking back. The engine purred to life and he drove away, disappearing into the small town that had rejected his vision in favor of Ilara's. The moment he was gone, the crowd erupted, cheering and clapping and celebrating not just the inspection approval, but the victory over the man who'd haunted the Hartwell family for 3 generations. Lila felt her knees go weak, felt the adrenaline that had been holding her upright suddenly drain away. Caleb caught her, held her up, and she leaned against her brother and let herself shake. "We did it," Caleb said. His voice was full of wonder. "We actually did it." "Yeah," Lila managed. "We did." Dell's hand landed on her shoulder, steady and warm. "Ilara would be proud," he said. "Hell, I'm proud. You stood up to the same bastard she spent her life running from, and you didn't blink." Maggie pushed through the crowd with a bottle of champagne someone had produced from somewhere, popped the cork with a whoop, poured it into paper cups and passed them around. "To the safe harbor," she said, raising her cup. "May it stand for another 60 years. To the safe harbor." The crowd echoed. Lila raised her cup and drank cheap champagne that tasted like victory. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. They corrected the minor violations Catherine had noted, received final clearance from the county, registered the business officially, ordered supplies and equipment, hired Maggie's niece, Sarah, to help run the cafe side. The opening was set for the first Saturday in June. Lila wanted something simple. Just open the doors and see who came. But Dell and Maggie had other ideas. "This town rallied for you," Maggie said. "They deserve to celebrate with you. Make it a proper opening. Ribbon cutting. Free chowder. The whole thing." So that's what they did. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. One of those rare coastal days where the sun burned through the fog and the sky was brilliant blue all the way to the horizon. Lila woke early in the apartment above the shop. They'd finally furnished it properly. A real bed, a small couch, a table and chairs. It was tiny, but it was home. She looked out of the window at the harbor. Fishing boats were already heading out for the day's catch. Dell's boat among them. He'd be back by 10 for the opening he'd promised. Downstairs, Caleb was already up setting out chairs on the pier. They were expecting maybe 50 people. Locals who'd helped. Volunteers who'd become friends. Maggie had made 5 gallons of chowder, figuring that would be plenty. By 9:30, there were 100 people gathered on the pier and the street beyond. By 10, closer to 200. News crews from Portland and Eugene set up cameras. The mayor of Crescent Bay showed up with an official proclamation. Lila stood in the doorway of the safe harbor and felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of people who'd come. People who believed in what she was trying to build. Who saw this place as more than just a shop. At 11, they did the ribbon cutting. Lila stood with the oversized scissors flanked by Caleb and Dell and Maggie. Porter read a statement about historical preservation and community resilience. The mayor said something about the spirit of small-town America. And then Lila cut the ribbon and the safe harbor was officially open. The crowd flooded in. They bought coffee and chowder, browsed the tackle and bait, sat at the counter Dell had built and looked out at the water, talked and laughed and filled the space with life. Maggie's 5 gallons of chowder were gone in an hour. They had to make 3 more batches. The espresso machine ran constantly. Sarah moved through the crowd with a grace that suggested she'd been born to waitress. Lila worked the register and talked to customers and watched her grandmother's dream finally come to life. This was what Elara had imagined. Not just a business, but a gathering place. A safe harbor where people could come in from the cold and the storm and feel like they belonged. Late in the afternoon, when the crowd had thinned to a manageable level, Dell found Lila sitting on the pier with a cup of coffee, taking her first break of the day. He sat down beside her, groaning slightly as his knees bent. "Hell of a day," he said. "Hell of a day." Lila agreed. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun start its descent toward the western horizon. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like polished glass. "I never told you why I helped," Dell said finally. "Why I showed up that first morning and offered to teach you carpentry." Lila looked at him. "You said it was because you were Grandma's friend. That was part of it. But there's more." He was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. "I was in love with her. With Elara. Had been since we were teenagers, but she married Jonathan and I went off to war. And by the time I came back, she was trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing her." He stared out at the water. "I knew what he was, knew he was hurting her. But I was young and stupid and scared. I didn't know how to help. Didn't know what to say or do that wouldn't make things worse. So I just watched. Watched her build this place in secret. Watched her get sick. watched her die without ever escaping the shadow of that bastard. His voice was rough now, heavy with old regret. When you showed up, you looked so much like her. Same eyes, same stubborn set to your jaw, same refusal to quit even when quitting was the smart thing to do. And I thought, here's my chance. I couldn't save Alara, but maybe I could help her granddaughter finish what she started. He looked at Lila. His eyes were wet. You did more than finish it. You made it better than she ever imagined. You turned her escape plan into something the whole community can share. That's not just honoring her memory. That's transforming it into something bigger. Lila felt her own eyes burning. She reached over and took Dell's weathered hand in hers. You did save her, she said quietly. Maybe not the way you wanted, but you saved her dream. You taught me how to build it right. You stood with me when I wanted to quit. You helped make this place what it is. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for everything. Dell squeezed back, didn't trust himself to speak. They sat like that as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The safe harbor behind them full of light and voices and the smell of good coffee. 6 months later, on a cold January morning, Lila stood in the same spot on the pier with a cup of coffee and watched Dell's boat head out for the day's catch. The routine had become sacred. Dell showed up at 5:30 every morning for coffee and to buy his day's bait. They'd talk for a few minutes about the weather, or the catch, or nothing at all. Then he'd head out and Lila would start her day. The safe harbor had found its rhythm. Mornings were for the fishermen. Coffee and bait and quiet conversation before the boats headed out. Mid-morning brought the local retirees who'd claimed the corner table as their own. Lunch was busy with people from town grabbing chowder and sandwiches. Afternoons were quieter, a mix of tourists and locals stopping in for coffee and the view. They weren't making a fortune, but they were making enough. Enough to pay Porter his percentage. Enough to save a little each month. Enough to plan for the future instead of just surviving the present. Caleb had enrolled in community college, marine biology. He commuted 3 days a week and worked at the safe harbor the other 4. He'd grown into the work, developed confidence Lila had never seen in him before. He could run the cafe solo now. Could handle difficult customers and broken equipment, and the 100 small crises that came with running a business. He was happy. For the first time since their mother died, genuinely happy. Maggie had become family. She stopped by most afternoons with fresh bread for the sandwiches and gossip from the diner. Taught Lila new recipes. Dispensed advice about business and life with equal parts wisdom and sarcasm. The volunteers who'd helped build the place became regulars. Russ stopped by for coffee before job sites. Margaret brought her grandkids to show them the plumbing work she'd done. Henry came in every Friday for chowder and to inspect his structural work with proprietary pride. Porter won a big case in Portland and semi-retired again, this time for real. He set up an office in the small back room and practiced part-time law for locals who couldn't afford the big city firms. The community had woven itself around the safe harbor, and the safe harbor had woven itself into the community. Thaddeus Branson never came back. Porter heard through legal channels that Cascadia had pulled out of the Crescent Bay development entirely. Too much local resistance. Too much bad publicity from trying to bully a teenage girl out of her inheritance. Branson moved his operations south to California. Lila hoped he'd finally let go of the 60-year-old grudge, but she didn't really care either way. He had no power over her anymore. No power over Elara's dream. The bell above the door chimed. Lila turned to see Sarah arriving for her shift early as always. "Morning, boss," she said, tying on her apron. "Morning. How's your mom?" "Good. She wanted me to ask if you need any extra help this weekend. Valentine's Day brings in the tourists. Tell her yes. We'll probably be slammed." Sarah headed to the espresso machine to start her opening routine. Lila watched her work efficient and cheerful, and felt a surge of gratitude for the life she'd built. She walked to the counter and ran her hand along the smooth wood. Dell's work. Her work. Built together with care and precision and love. On the wall behind the counter hung 3 photographs in matching frames. Elara in 1962, young and determined, standing in front of the anchor point on opening day. Nora in 1985, pregnant with Lila, laughing at some long-forgotten joke. And Lila and Caleb from the grand opening last June, covered in paint and exhaustion and triumph. 3 generations of Hartwell women. 3 generations of fighting for safety and home, and the right to exist without fear. Lila had added a 4th frame last week, still empty, waiting for the future, for whoever came next, for the daughter or son or grandchild who would carry the story forward, because that was the real inheritance, not the money or the building or the business. It was the knowledge that home wasn't a place you were born into. It was something you built with your own hands, something you fought to protect, something you could create even when the world tried to convince you it was impossible. The door chimed again. Morning customers starting to arrive, fishermen wanting coffee before heading out. Dell's friends claiming their usual table. Lila tied on her apron and stepped behind the counter, picked up the coffee pot, and started making rounds. "Morning, Lila," said Tom, settling into his chair with the newspaper. "Morning, usual." "You know it." She poured his coffee. Black, no sugar. Had it memorized for every regular. The espresso machine hissed. Sarah called out orders. The smell of fresh bread filled the air as Caleb pulled the first batch from the oven. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning fog, painting the harbor in shades of silver and blue. Lila looked around at the full cafe, at the faces she'd come to know, at the space she'd helped build, at the dream she'd made real. This was her safe harbor. Not because it had walls and a roof, but because it was full of people who'd chosen to stay, who'd chosen to help, who'd chosen to believe that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting. She thought about Elara dying alone with her dream unfulfilled. Thought about her mother never knowing the escape route that had been built for her. Thought about herself and Caleb standing on a curb with nowhere to go and everything to lose. And she smiled. They'd made it. Against odds that should have crushed them. Against a system designed to favor the powerful. Against a man who'd spent 60 years trying to erase what one woman had built in defiance. They'd made it. The safe harbor stood, would keep standing. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some dreams are too important to let die. And some women are too stubborn to quit no matter how hard the world pushes back. Lila Hartwell was one of those women. Just like her grandmother before her. Just like whoever came after would be. The legacy wasn't money or property. It was resilience. It was the knowledge that you could take something broken and make it whole, that you could inherit ruins and build a home, that you could turn a $5 inheritance into something priceless. She poured another coffee, took another order, lived another moment in the life she'd fought to create, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.